Welcome to the CEC report. It's October 21 and I'm Robert Barwick. I'm joined again by CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Thanks, Robbie.
Okay, we've got a bit to go through today, but two main items. The first, the Grim Reaper arrives to a CEC surprise. And second, occupy your mind to fight for a concrete solution. Glass-Steagall. So first, the Grim Reaper arrives to a CEC surprise. I wonder if people know who I'm talking about. The Grim Reaper herself arrived in person in Australia on Wednesday on a British Airways jet that landed in Canberra.
In primetime television, Robbie.
In primetime television, you think they arranged that?
It's part of the propaganda
It
operation.
is. The fact that it was prime time didn't help her mood. She was still a sour old foreign woman who got off that plane, who we all gushed over as our queen, who's now on the front page of every paper in the country. By now though, Craig, she's probably been given a copy of her surprise present from the CEC.
Well, I believe our youth actually had a banner up on the side of Lake, is it Burley Griffin?
Burley Griffin, yeah.
And while she was going past in the launch, so hopefully she's got the first of many warm welcomes from us.
She looked particularly sour that day on the news, so maybe she must have read that one.
Well, this is a really highly choreographed tour to prop up the flagging popularity of the British royal family and the Crown internationally.
Oh, absolutely. And you see the role the media plays in this, in just making sure that it is covered from morning till night. Yeah. And they've got little kids out there curtsying, etc., and that is oh so wonderful.
But again, stage managed. She flew into the Air Force Base in Canberra, select number of school children, in primetime television, complete official ceremony stuff, all covered as if this stuff is completely normal. Here we have unelected head of state, so-called.
A foreigner,
and someone...
Which Australians don't like foreigners.
And that's putting it in polite terms, but we actually have here the representative of the British genocidal faction of the British Crown. I mean, this is what this person represents, and that's not a very popular thing to talk about, but we have been recently.
Exactly. Well, so our surprise for her is 50,000 copies of our latest New Citizen newspaper, which you can hold up for the screen if you want.
This one here, yes.
We talked about this at length last week. We've just upped the ante a little bit. You can tell the audience how we've boosted it.
Well, as part of this paper is such a large paper, and it's we've been putting around all the universities and so forth because look, the content of it is incredible. We're talking about, for example, in specific detail, how the British Crown created green fascism. We're talking about what real science is. We go after the second law of thermodynamics in this paper. And so therefore we want this paper into the intellectual layers of our country to create the sort of debate that is absolutely necessary for our survival as a nation. So in order to launch that paper, we put out a flyer, 150,000 copies of a flyer with a very provocative headline on it, "Does the Queen intend to kill you?" Now, some people tend to wince at this because they think, oh, how can you say that? This is because look at the images coming through on the television. This little old lady, 85 years of age, in a nice green dress and a hat. How could this possible little old lady be wanting to kill us? Well, see, that's the fraud. This is the propaganda of why the media is so intent of promoting her in that way. She represents the head of the British Crown that has promoted fascism in the last 50 years in an incredible campaign in specific ways. She represents a policy direction, with her husband in particular, Prince Philip, of reducing the world's population down to below 1 billion people. And as we reported before, Hans Schellenhuber came out publicly. He was knighted by the Queen for services to science, specifically because he comes out and promotes this idea of reducing the world's population down to below 1 billion people. Now, when we say, does a Queen intend to kill you? Well, she's not got a gun or a sword or whatever to come out and clonk you on the head or shoot you with. But her policy direction is going to kill billions of people.
Well, specifically, her husband repeatedly, Prince Philip repeatedly quotes Malthus.
Yes.
In her 1964 Christmas address to Australia, the Queen listed as first among the world's problems overpopulation. When you are obsessed with overpopulation and you are a follower of Malthus, then you have to go back to Malthus to see what we mean by genocide. And Malthus was quite explicit. Deny hygiene, deny proper living standards, make sure, Malthus said that unless we have a situation where for every baby that's born, someone else dies, the world will overpopulate. So we have to make sure that we create the circumstances where we encourage death. And Malthus used these measures, build towns around open sewers, etc. And in his words, to court the return of the plague, stop the well-meaning people, medical people, who will try and, look after people's health. Sorry.
But specifically, also when Prince Philip came back out here in the 70s, right, with the Queen, he was railing against science and technology, right? Shut it down. We can't allow people to have science and technology because, this would allow them to really develop and, and actually be happy, is what it represents. So he came out publicly. We've got the newspaper articles from that period saying exactly that. Now, why would someone like that come out railing against the dangers of science and technology? It's because they don't want population.
Because they know that's what allows populations to grow, and if you don't have it, populations will collapse. Yeah. Now, so just because they're not lining people up against the wall and shooting them, doesn't mean it's not genocide. The genocide standard we're citing here is the Nuremberg standard, where doctors, Nazi doctors in Nuremberg, were hanged on the grounds that they knew or should have known that their policy of denying healthcare would kill people.
Well, I think when you look at Australian TV, 9 out of every TV programs are cop shows, right? And you've got murders and you've got all sorts of homicides happening on television all the time. So when people think kill, they think bang, shoot, cut, whatever, in order to kill someone. What kills people more is policy directions of governments that have an ideological idea of, in this case, population reduction. Yep. And this is what the Gillard government represents today. It's a horrendous government in terms of policy direction. Hence, we've now got the carbon tax, which is going to shut down industry. It's moving in the direction of the carbon emissions trading scheme, which promotes the trading of carbon credits. Well, who's going to benefit from that? This is another extension of the Wall Street fraud of swindling people out of money and taxing the populations, in effect. But I mean, the other aspect of this radical greenie agenda, this genocide promoted by the Queen and Prince Philip top down for decades now, is of course the policy of globalisation, right? And this is where the money, in a sense, comes in from corporate sponsors and so forth to fund the green movement. And there's billions of dollars being spent, billions upon billions of dollars being spent over decades now to brainwash the population into believing that somehow there is a problem with overpopulation of human beings destroying the planet and so forth. Now, we are in a big problem as far as our own survival of a species is concerned if we do not embrace science and technology, because we're moving into another extinction cycle, the 62 million year-long cycle of where our Earth is in relation to the solar system and the galaxy. Now, we go through that in a great deal of detail here in this paper, and what you noticed right throughout the history of the Earth is that every 62 million years you have these extinction events because of the position of the Earth and the solar system in the galaxy. This is where you get larger amounts of cosmic radiation coming in that affect the weather, that in effect wipe out. Up to 99% of living species get wiped out from these sorts of events. Now, we're coming into one of these, into this particular period. So if we do not embrace science and technology and start to really understand how the principles of the universe work, as opposed to this green absolute nonsense of solar power, wind power and so forth, of low energy flux density, then our species is threatened by extinction as well, because we can't control necessarily a number of these huge galactic events that can happen.
And the article in the paper that deals explicitly with that is the second law of thermodynamics is a fraud. For the sake of the audience, let's talk about 2 examples to disabuse people of any illusions they may have. 2 examples that back up our charge of genocide.
You're going to talk about our lemon juice men.
our lemon juice man, our sourpuss.
Our sourpuss.
Roger Short, and also fascism. But let's talk about. Last week we just mentioned Roger Short briefly. I'll give some a bit of a précis of it. Roger Short is a Melbourne University professor who addressed the Royal Society of Victoria on overpopulation. Now, in case you don't think that the people we're fighting are serious about overpopulation and acting on it, just listen to Roger Short. He opened his address in a way that stunned our activists who were present by whining how in his lifetime, he's over 80 now, Roger, in his lifetime the world population has grown from 2 billion people to 7 billion people, which he said, quote, "I find that personally humiliating." Now, to boot, this is from a father of 5 children. This kind of a perverse passion placed in this area shows you the clear intention these guys have. One measure that Roger Short advocates is the use of lemon juice by women in developing countries as a spermicidal contraceptive. So the CEC activists who are present, led by our youth members, handed out lemons to the attendees which had written on them, among other things, "Don't be a sourpuss."
I think from our intervention, though, he had to back off and deny that he now supports that, Robbie, but one can't believe that's true.
I think he got his own lemon.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
But
he did tell one of our youth organisers to pour the lemon juice on their penis.
That's right.
He
That was his solution for the youth who intervened on him.
Yeah.
So who's Roger Short? Roger Short is a protege of Sir Julian Huxley. Now, Julian Huxley was Prince Philip's co-founder of the World Wildlife Fund. Julian Huxley was the president of the British Eugenics Society, which was the racist pseudoscientist who wanted to create a master race in the world that Hitler applied in Germany.
And we go through quite a bit of his background in this paper.
All the details are in there, sure. So Huxley, more than anyone else in the 20th century probably, advanced the green agenda, specifically with the intent to lock up as much land as possible away from humans, because if they can't develop it, that impinges on their ability to grow food and get energy sources, etc. In his own way, Short, Huxley's protege, was one of the first people to demand population reduction to stop global warming. And it was Short who came up with the saying, "Fewer feet equals a smaller carbon footprint." Right? We reduce population, we'll stop global warming. And given his passion, given the obsession with global warming, that we have to have a carbon tax and all kinds of things, and given that he, in tune with the Queen and Prince Philip and these whole eugenicists, etc., tied into population reduction, this is a clear agenda. Do not kid yourself. All right. The second example is more in the realm of fascism. Last week, probably this week, Channel 7 in Brisbane reported in what they considered was a totally positive story, looked at the right way. It's horrifying. It's on the use of satellite technology to impose eco-fascism. School children at a certain high school in Brisbane are part of a program whereby they are individually assigned areas of rainforest in Borneo to monitor via a satellite feed, not via Google Earth, which only gets updated periodically. They get a direct satellite link to a view of this Borneo rainforest area. And if these school kids, they win points for monitoring it, and if they detect any changes to the foliage, etc., that indicates illegal land clearing, then they immediately inform a network of self-described eco-warriors on the ground to take action against these illegal land clearers. Now, who are the illegal land clearers? Is it Rio Tinto in London, or is it some multinational? Invariably no. These are native Indonesians, local Indonesians who, this is not about defending land clearing, it's about what they're doing is they're doing for their survival and for their rights. And we are monitoring it from the sky.
This is an attack on their sovereignty.
Absolutely.
Just pure and simple. Here you have, of all things, children, right? This is what I talked about, the billions of dollars before, Robbie, of coming into the system. You've had a program of literally billions of dollars being spent on schools since the 1970s. Now, I'm a bit over 50 years of age, and I can remember the beginning of the environmentalist thrust in the 1970s when I was about 10 years of age. You know, you had the books like the How and Why series of destroying the earth, right? And look, there has been companies that have done the wrong thing as far as the environment is concerned, but that wasn't the issue. This has been driven politically top down by the likes of Prince Philip, who in the 1970s came down here, personally established the Australian Conservation Foundation, personally campaigned publicly for population reduction, anti-science and technology. This is a top-down, as we've seen today, political operation based upon population reduction. So when you start to see these school kids, right, taking the lead from these teachers, which have been totally brainwashed on this green agenda, now spying on a sovereign country, right, and doing it so-called lawfully, this is what the attack is on the very sovereignty of Indonesia, and it's a very serious problem. Now, these eco-warriors, if they get themselves killed up there, right, are going to scream like crazy that somehow they had a right to go into a sovereign country and do what they're going to do to save the wildlife, in this particular case orangutans, based upon the assumption that orangutans and other animals and trees are more important than human life.
Well, one of those eco-warriors, a particularly feral-looking one, said as much, because he basically indicated that his whole inspiration for doing this was the movie Avatar, where he compared the local Indonesians clearing land to the way the movie Avatar worked, where Earthlings, people from Earth, went to another planet and were clearing that land. And of course, the point he was making is the orangutans are the equivalent of the human creatures from the other planet on Avatar. I wonder what the native Indonesians or the local Indonesian people think about that comparison. And of course, the other disturbing thing is the use of children. This is out and out fascism, but the use of children is a very, very disturbing.
Incredibly so.
I wrote down here, this is like Pol Pot's killing fields, where Pol Pot targeted adults, school teachers, etc., and gave teenagers the job of doing the killing. With Big Brother and from George Orwell's 1984.
See, what we're talking about, Robbie, sounds so incredibly radical, right? It sounds way out there. When you compare that with the mass brainwashing we're getting now on the major TV stations with this nice little queen coming down, this not so nice very queen actually, coming down looking like all the stage managed stuff. When we start talking about these issues, people wince. They say, how can this be true? The reality of what I'm seeing on my so-called reality I'm seeing on TV doesn't marry up with what you guys are talking about. Well, that's why we put this flyer out. And if you just step back a little bit and you think about the shutdown of the farming industries in our nation, particularly family farmers, we've lost over half of them in the last 20 to 30 years. You think about the lack of support for food production in this country, actual lack. We've lost most of our rice producing areas based upon the whole fraud of the Murray-Darling Basin wetlands operation, because there's been no support even during drought periods to support our rice producers. You think about the wetlands locking up valuable farming areas, you think about the wilderness areas which we've mapped out. You know, you look at this map on the back with all the red. This is Australia in lockdown.
Well, let me just point out, all these coloured patches that aren't yellow are what has been already locked down in Australia, and the two of the major patches that are yellow, one is the Murray-Darling Basin and one is the area of Queensland that's being targeted with wild rivers laws. So that's being targeted for shutdown, and of course the Murray-Darling Basin is being targeted for shutdown. There won't be anything left.
No, and you start thinking about, well, if they're shutting down all our farming areas, our food producing areas, outsourcing food to third world countries, so we import a lot of it. Then you've got the duopoly between Coles and Woolworths that are reducing the price of milk and other staples down to the point that our farmers can't produce, even those that can produce are not getting paid for it. It's not we're not very far away from people, a lot of people actually starving to death. So when we say these policies will kill you, the policies the Queen supports, this is not an exaggeration. anyone that thinks about physical economic production from the point of view of how you produce things starts to say, we're losing everything here. And these are not industries that you can just put back together overnight, like in 2 or 3 years. You'd have to have a real wartime mobilisation to do that, which is quite possible, I'm sure. But the fact is we're losing generations of farmers. We're losing generations of productive people. And I can just see, you know, mass death in this country, even with a very small population.
Well, just on that, it was conservatively estimated that during the reign of Queen Victoria, 85 million people under British rule died, mostly of starvation, in Ireland, India and China, largely.
This is the Crown we're talking about.
This is under Queen Victoria's rule, directly as a result of free trade, which the British and the East India Company that was responsible for it, though, blamed on overpopulation. And it was Abraham Lincoln's economic advisor, Henry Carey, who sort of called it for what it was. And basically, he said the East India Company invented the lie of overpopulation as something that they could blame the genocide perpetrated by their free trade policies on.
Who Malthus worked for.
Who Malthus worked for. And so we are seeing that repeated today.
And you haven't even raised the issue of the land clearances in Scotland by the British Crown, or the genocide of Ireland based
upon... And a lot more in Africa as well.
And Africa, I mean, we can just go, we've documented all this material on just how specifically the British Crown has created genocide over centuries. So it's not a new policy.
Well, that's a good way to talk about our next subject, Craig, because we have this, we've titled this Occupy Your Mind for a Concrete Solution, Glass-Steagall. And you have this Occupy Wall Street movement which is now spread around the world. And on the surface, a fair few of the things that they are on about are definitely commendable. I mean, it's always good to go after Wall Street.
But I think what Mr. LaRouche said this week really sort of captures the mood, where he said, you know, to a group of his collaborators, he says, he's talking about this movement, he says, like this silly ass nonsense going on in Manhattan, another silly opposition even worse than the Tea Party. Now, a lot of people thought the Tea Party was pretty good, but you know, this is worse than the Tea Party because the Tea Party was actually a fascist movement in itself. He says this is a bunch of complete, utter fools, and they're typical. Look at the two cases, the Tea Party and this thing in New York. Both absolute, utter fools, one worse than the other. The one in New York is worse than the Tea Party. It's opportunism. They say, we have no program, we don't allow a program. At least the Tea Party would discuss a program, you know, some kind of program. But these populists,
And we had this directly. The CEC activists in Sydney, at the Occupy Wall Street protest in Sydney, were told that we could distribute material on Glass-Steagall, which they're receptive to discussing, only on the grounds that it's anonymous, that it can't be identified as part of the CEC, because they have this commitment. They insist that they have to be organic, unorganised, democratic, and reject any program, as LaRouche is saying, for an actual program for a solution.
That's always the catch cry for something that won't work, because right throughout the entire period that I've been established the CEC, the last 23 years, you come across these groups that say, you've got great ideas, but you have to be apolitical.
Yeah.
You can't be political.
You've got great ideas, but you've got to make sure you're not in a position to do anything about them.
Exactly. And I mean, we got criticised way back in 1988 for forming a political party, because people said, no, you've got to do it apolitically. The League of Rights was one of those groups. You know,
no, you're committing yourself. Don't commit yourself.
To real ideas, that take a position, a policy issue direction. And see, that's what the problem is with this you know, say no to Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street movement. They have no policy. This is like, and we know these people. I mean, when you look at their signs, you see that they're, you know, the far left of politics, and we've had a lot to do. You know, they've actually.
Well, they're the green left, and that's another point I wanted to make, because while they're going after Wall Street, which is great, they are defending the very evil, genocidal evil against people that we've exposed in this paper. They would consider the carbon tax economic justice, but Wall Street is bad. Well, it's the same British Crown that's driving the whole thing, so I have these gaps in logic. But yeah, as you said, we recognise and we know who they are. My point that I wanted to get you to comment on specifically is, this is a concrete crisis. Like the economic crisis in the world today can be identified as to its concrete cause, and therefore there's a concrete solution. So if you're going to occupy something, as one of our members says, occupy your mind, master what the solution is and fight for it.
Yeah, well, that is the Glass-Steagall. I mean, it's a very concrete proposal put on the ground. That's what Mr. LaRouche has said. These people in the Occupy Wall Street, they don't want the proposed solutions. This goes back to the same rage against the establishment ideas of the 1968ers generation. There's no solutions being proposed. Therefore, it's actually a disastrous protest movement because it's not going to go anywhere. It's going to. Why don't they actually pick up the Glass-Steagall and run with it, and actually run with it with a fervour? It's because the intention is not there to do that.
And just on Glass-Steagall, we've been off the air for a little while, and in that time, of course, while we're preparing for this new citizen, the global financial crisis has deepened considerably. Every day on the news now, when they bring up the stock market board, it's just red, 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 blood in the water, as they say. And a lot of people out there are absolutely panicked.
And it's also based on highly emotive information. The stock market goes up one day and the news presenter says,
it's over.
People feel good about what's happening in Europe. Then it goes down the next day. People feel bad about Europe. This is a total crock. The system is in a systemic process of disintegration based upon the enormous amount of speculative debt in the system. There's nothing that's going to stop that process of disintegration based upon anything that happens in the stock market.
Well, the bailouts of Greece has already disintegrated effectively, the bailout of Greece.
The only possibility, as Mr. LaRouche said, is the idea of a global Glass-Steagall. First of all, starting in the US.
Well, just before you elaborate, Wayne Swan is over in Europe at the moment, and he's just made the point that the most important thing that has to be done is to prop up the euro at all costs. What do you think of that?
Wayne Swan is a tool of the establishment. He's part of the Labor Party, which is dominated by Fabian socialists. The intention is to support this model of globalisation no matter what. The euro should be dumped. This is an artificial currency that was imposed specifically under the Maastricht Treaty and other forms of nation-busting policies in order to destroy Europe. The euro is a measure of how Europe has been destroyed.
With Glass-Steagall and the dumping of the euro, Greece would be most of the way towards solving its problems by now.
It's the only way it can solve its problems. You can't have a sovereign country that is not in control of its own credit. And if you have a debt problem based upon the enormous amount of speculation from the Inter-Alpha banking group, which is controlled by and run through the agencies of the British Crown and Wall Street, then what you have to do is, as we've proposed, as Mr. LaRouche has proposed, is you have to separate out that speculative parasitical debt from the legitimate debt that's in the economy, that supports the economy. That's the debt that will support the pensions, the production of manufactures, farming and so forth. You separate out that debt, that speculative debt that belongs to Wall Street. You say, you guys can have your debt back. We're going to charge it back to you. You quarantine it, right? And then what you've got to do is you have to create a large amount of credit as a state, like in the case of Greece, as a state for economic development. And you use that credit in order to then build the physical economy. That's the only way out. It's the only way out for Australia. And once we get, for Australia in this particular period, only way out for the US. It's the only way out for any nation state. Sovereign credit, sovereignty as a principle being re-established, and having the guts to actually do it.
All right, well, thanks for that, Craig. Just before we wrap up, breaking news, LaRouche put a different perspective on Glass-Steagall overnight, where he basically said, look, under Glass-Steagall, most of America's banks, the great majority of them, will be saved, thousands of them. He said it's mainly 6 great big ones that are going to be dumped, and that's a good thing. So read LaRouche for an elaboration on that. So that's it for this week's CEC report. Thanks for tuning in. It's, as you can see, it's all happening, and we'll brief you again next week.
And make sure you get a copy of our paper.
Hear, hear.